Thank you, choir. I love the fact that you all come out and sit in the congregation. I was a choir director at a small church, and we did exactly that same thing. And it's really just the symbolism of we are part of the community, and we come out and sit with our church family. Just beautiful. So thank you. I'm Mark Montgomery. I'm a retired music teacher. And as a retired teacher, I'm glad there are a bunch of us because you never end up not being a teacher. And I have found when I write sermons, I write teaching sermons. And so I'm going to hopefully explore this story, maybe bring a different perspective to it, but just really dig into it. One of the things I'm taking in seminary now is a New Testament course. And we read it in Greek, but we take a story and we just really talk about the depth of the story. And this story is not part of our lectionary passage today. When I was preparing the lectionary passage, I was reading and I went, I don't like any of these passages for today. And so I had my wife read them, and she read the first one and went, ooh. She read the second one, but okay, that's not any better. Read the third one, it's like, okay. Read the final one from Mark, and she said, well, I guess you're going to have to preach on the Mark passage, but, good luck. And so I'm thinking if I knew you all really well, I might wrestle with those passages, but I'm going to do something that we all know a little bit better and can dig our teeth into a little bit more. So I'm not preaching from the lectionary. And it's good to see so many familiar faces here, even though Chris Posey is back hiding there. I've known many of you for years, and Chris was one of the students at Columbus Tech when I was doing the campus ministry Bible studies there. So it's good to see so many familiar faces. Also, last summer, I went to visit Barry Ferguson, and he gave me part of his theological library. And it was just this touching time to me to spend time with Barry and for him to say, my children don't want this. I want to give it to somebody who cares about these things. And we spent hours together just visiting. Barry and I got in trouble at Montreat many times playing cards. The kids would come down and complain that we were too loud playing cards when it was time for them to go to bed. So it's good to be with you all today. So, as I said, this is not a passage from the lectionary, but it deals with water. And I was reading a Facebook post from one of my professors who lives in Asheville now. He's retired. He moved to Asheville. And he just started talking about the fact that he had no electricity, no cell service, and no water for 2 weeks, and still does not have water. He talked about the inconvenience that he quickly realized not having water meant, and how it was filling up buckets and carrying buckets to his house for their daily living. And as a theology professor, he really gets into the different understandings of how we do this. And I'm not going to do that with y'all, I promise. But it's really that water is important. And this story is about Jesus, who is our living water. So we're going to dig in. Now, I chose the passage from John because John does things a little differently. John is different than all the other gospel writers because at the beginning of his ministry, Jesus is saying, don't tell the people who I am. He performs miracles, he performs healings, but he says, don't tell the people. And there's this secret of who Jesus is that reveals itself later in the gospel stories. But John is different. John, from the very beginning, says Jesus is the Messiah. And Jesus says, I am the Messiah. This is in the 4th chapter. Our story for today is from the 4th chapter of John. A lot has happened in the previous 3 chapters. Chapter 1, we get this beautiful poetry. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Beautiful poetry where John lays out who Jesus is. But then we don't get any birth stories. We don't get any childhood stories. We get Jesus baptizing John. Nope, that's not correct. Jesus does not baptize. John the Baptist does not baptize in the Gospel of John, but John the Baptist is baptizing and telling people the Messiah is coming. The Messiah is coming. Jesus then calls his disciples in Galilee. Then he turns water into wine at a wedding. And then all of a sudden he shows up in Jerusalem. Now it's important to know the geography of Israel at this time. Galilee is up at the top, the northern part of the country. Jerusalem is down in the bottom part. And we're going to find out what's in the middle part here in a second. But Jesus is now in Jerusalem, and he turns over the tables in the temple, and he just makes a statement. This is my Father's house. You're destroying my Father's house. And that night, Nicodemus, one of the leaders of the Jewish people at the time, sneaks in and asks Jesus, "Who are you?" And we get all these questions about being born again and the beautiful passage from John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. And Nicodemus doesn't quite get it, and we don't know what happens to Nicodemus. There's no story of Nicodemus leaving. There's no reaction. But in John 19, we discover that in preparation for Jesus' burial, Nicodemus did bring aloe and other herbs to prepare Jesus' body. So sometime Nicodemus gets it, but here in John 3, Nicodemus does not get it. So we're still in Judea, and Jesus is now starting to baptize in the Spirit. Well, John the Baptist is baptizing with water, and there's this competition that the Pharisees try to pit them against each other. And John the Baptist is asked, "Are you the Messiah?" And John the Baptist says, "No, I'm not the Messiah, but he's coming. He's coming. He's coming." So Jesus, knowing this is not his time, decides it's time to leave Jerusalem. And so he goes back to Galilee. That's his hometown. That's where he called his disciples. That is home for Jesus. But to get there, he has to pass through Samaria. And Samaria has a history with the Jews, and it's not a pleasant history. Today, when we think of Samaritans, we think of the Good Samaritans. And during this time, the adjective of good would never have been used with the Samaritan. The Samaritans were a part of the original 12 tribes of Israel. But when the kingdom was divided, here comes your history lesson for your teachers. When the country was divided into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, the people in the northern kingdom said to the people in the southern kingdom, "You're not worshiping correctly." And they said, "No, we worship in Jerusalem. The temple's in Jerusalem." And they say, No. We're going to build a new temple up in our country." And they built it up on a mountain called Mount Gerizim, up on their country, very close to where this story takes place. They said, "All those writings of the prophets, we don't believe those. All the wisdom literature like Psalms, that's not part of who we are. It is only the first, what we call the first 5 books of our Bible, the Pentateuch. Those are the only scriptures that we have." And this debate got more and more heated. I was trying to think of something comparable in America today. And the only thing I could really think that is strong enough is the Civil War. My parents traveled around a lot when I was a child, and the first time I learned about the Civil War, I was living in Indiana. And then we moved to Georgia, and I learned a different story of the Civil War when I moved to Georgia. And even 150 years later, we are still very divided on how we understand the Civil War. And that is the way the Samaritans were with the Jewish people down in Jerusalem, in the southern part, in Judea. In 110 BCE, the Jews went and actually destroyed the temple of the people of Samaria. They said, this is wrong, we are going to destroy you. Everything that the Samaritans did was unclean. And the idea of cleanliness was very important to the Jewish people. And even traveling through these areas, if you were a good Jewish person who lived in Galilee, when you went to Jerusalem, you would not go through Samaria. You would divert and go across the River Jordan, travel on the other side of the river, and then come back into Judea. They did not like each other. A long 1,000-year hatred of each other in some ways. So when Jesus decides to flee Jerusalem because of this conflict that's being built up, he's like, I'm just going straight through. While he's there, he gets hungry, because we all get hungry. We're human. Sends his disciples off, and he sits at this well. And this woman comes up, and it's about noon when this woman comes up. The fact that it's noon tells us something about this woman. Because back during this time, women had women's jobs and men had men's jobs, and women did not work outside the house. Their job was, many of them, their job was to take care of the house. And gathering water was key, because there is no indoor plumbing. So every morning they had to go and gather their vessels and fill up their vessels and go to their homes with their water. They did this when it was cool. So first thing in the morning, they would get up, they would gather, they'd gossip probably and share time together, and then they would go into their house. And by noon, it's the heat of the day. And so here's this woman coming by herself at noon to gather water. Traditionally, this woman has been accused of many things that are not biblical, but she has been turned into a very questionable woman. I'm looking to see, I don't see a lot of young eyes here. There are accusations that she is sexually immoral, and just she is not the kind of person that good people would not have wanted to associate with. So Jesus comes and starts talking to her. He says, give me a drink. Let me have some water. She's a woman. Back then, men and women really who were not related didn't really talk to each other. She was a Samaritan woman. And Jesus asked for a drink. Now, Jesus does not have a glass. He can't get his own water, so he would have to drink out of her vessel. And that idea of drinking out of a Samaritan utensil would have been unthinkable. So Jesus sits down and says, give me a drink. He doesn't care who she is. He doesn't care about her history. He doesn't care that she's Samaritan. He says, give me a drink. She's a little bit more savvy to how the world worked. So she questions Jesus. How can you ask me, a Samaritan woman, to give you a drink? So they have an extended conversation, and Jesus, in the way that Jesus always does, asks these cryptic questions that we don't really understand. And it gets to the point where Jesus says, and Peter's already read this, whoever drinks of the water, this water will be thirsty again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give them will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life. What? Are we talking water or are we talking something else? So the woman replies, Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty. Maybe she gets it. Or have to keep coming here to draw water. Maybe she doesn't get it. Give me this living water. Yeah, she gets it. She gets it. So I don't have to keep coming back here to draw water. Oh, maybe she doesn't. But just like Nicodemus in the 3rd chapter, he didn't get it either. Nicodemus is trained in the law. He grew up hearing these biblical stories. He knew what was happening. He didn't get it. Here is this woman who is this outsider, who is unclean, a Samaritan, and maybe she does get it. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she does. So the story goes on, and I'm going to do the second reading now, but I'm going to break it up into some smaller chunks. So Jesus says to her, Go call your husband and come back. The woman answered him, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, You are right in saying I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. The woman said to him, Sir, I see that you are a prophet. So maybe she is getting it a little bit more. But the beauty of this story is that Jesus, once again, is not passing judgment. Jesus is there and accepting her for who she is. It's not what she has done that's important to Jesus. It's that she is a person in need. She is a person who is hurting and Jesus doesn't know, but the fact that she's there at noon by herself can see that she is an outcast in the community. So Jesus says to her, she says to Jesus, I see that you're a prophet. She's not saying he's Messiah yet, but she's saying that he is a prophet. The woman goes on and says, Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain. But you say that the place where the people must worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will follow the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father speaks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. It doesn't matter where we worship. It matters who we worship. Jesus then says this, I am he. The one who is speaking to you is he. Just the way God said to Moses at the burning bush, I am he. Jesus here says, I am he. I am the Messiah. Does she get it? We don't know exactly. Because just then the disciples came, and they were astonished by what he was saying, that he was speaking with a woman. But no one said, What do you want? Or why are you speaking with her? Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, Come and see a man who told me everything I've ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he? They left the city and were on their way to see him. She's still not certain that Jesus is the Messiah, but what does she do? She leaves her water jar. Just the way the call of the original disciples were to leave their nets, to leave their way of life, and become a follower of Jesus. This woman leaves her jar and goes back to the city to tell the people, is this the one? Is this who we have been waiting for? Now, I explained that the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along, but both were people who were waiting for the Messiah. Nicodemus missed it in that original meeting. But this woman, does she get it? She leaves just on the strong enough question of, is this the one? That she leaves her jar and comes. Goes to the city, is this the one? So my question is, where do we fit in this passage? Who are we? We can't really be Jesus. That's already a job that's been taken. We could be the disciples by saying, who are you talking to? But I propose that we are the woman. We may not have the history and the animosity that the Samaritan has, but we are broken people. Just by being human, we are sinners. We cannot do it on our own. We cannot achieve that perfection that God has created for us on our own. Our sin separates us. But Jesus comes to us the same way he came to the woman. He doesn't care about our stories. He cares about us as people. And he calls us to leave our way and to follow him. Now, I am Presbyterian and I am scared of the word evangelism, but that is what the woman does. She's still not completely certain that Jesus is the way, but she goes and she shares that story and says, come, you need to meet this man. And brothers and sisters, that is what we are called to do. We are called to go to our friends. I don't know if I want to go knock on doors on strangers' house, but I can tell my friends about who Jesus is, who God is, and how that has impacted who I am as a person. And it does not matter age, anything. We can all do that. It's uncomfortable at times. But this is God who has changed our lives. The fact that we are here tells people that we are followers of Jesus. And that is what we need to learn from this woman. May it be so. Thank you.